Good evening. Please be seated. Good evening all. I'd like to ask Reverend Canon Stuart Thomas from St Peter's and St Francis Church, Frimley, to guide the council in prayer.
Thank you. And as I'm sure most of you realise, I am no longer a resident of Surrey Heath, but I very much enjoyed my 8 years. So I wonder if we could just briefly hold in mind in our own thoughts and prayers, however that is for us, however we relate to that, those in our borough who need us to make good decisions, who rely on the work of this council for their well-being, for their support, for their care. We ask you, God, to bless the work that goes on this evening, and most especially the work that makes for the well-being of all the residents of this borough. Remembering especially those in particular need this evening, any we know who have gone through bereavement or difficult times in recent days. Remembering too those who rely on council services for their livelihood, for their welfare, for the blessing of their lives. And of course, while the focus this evening is on Surrey Heath, may we also remember that we are not disconnected from events elsewhere. And although the pandemic may feel as though its tide is ebbing now a little, nonetheless, the aftermath is still with us. But our minds are taken to Ukraine, and in particular, perhaps, the number of refugees. I'm told that it's in excess of 5 million who have left the country now, and maybe 5 or 6 million more within Ukraine who are displaced. I don't know if any refugees are coming to Surrey Heath, but we pray for any who may be on their way to this country. Give thanks for those who are hosting them, and pray that Surrey Heath, as so many other boroughs, will be welcoming and generous hosts to those who, temporarily at least, may have nowhere else to live. And we pray too for an end to the violence, remembering that our work in representing the people of Surrey Heath involves bringing about peaceable relations between all people, whatever their background and origin. And so we pray, good Lord, that you will bless this meeting, that you will guide the thoughts of all who participate in it, in its agenda, in its discussions and deliberations, and in the decisions which come from that. Praying that all will be done in this meeting for the good of the borough of Surrey Heath, for those in particular need, but remembering too its connection with the wider world, which is these days so immediate and real. And we bring all of those concerns before God, in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Stuart. Welcome members, officers, aldermen, and any members of the public viewing at home to this evening's council meeting. Members, given the ongoing situation with the pandemic, I move that the Council Procedure Rule 21.2, requirement to stand, be suspended for this meeting. Do I have a seconder?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm happy to second that proposal.
Is that agreed, members?
Agreed.
Before we move on to the agenda, I just want to assure those members viewing the meeting agenda on their iPads that I will be covering items 2, 4, 6 and 7, which seem to have disappeared from the online version of the agenda. Miss Willis, may I have apologies for absence, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've received apologies from Councillor Graham Alloway, Councillor Peter Barnett, Councillor Stuart Black, Councillor Liz Noble and Councillor David Lewis. And some are joining us online, but as you know, will not be able to vote.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 2, I propose that the minutes of the meeting of the Council held on the 23rd of February 2022 be approved as a correct record. Do I have a seconder?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to second that proposal.
Is that agreed, members? Moving on to item 3, report of the returning officer. I would like to invite the returning officer to introduce his report, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This report relates to the by-election for the Bisley and West End ward that took place on the 14th of April. And as members are aware, the outcome of the election was the election of Councillor Liz Noble, and she was duly elected. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 4, my announcements, and hopefully I'll hand that over. So as you can see, another busy couple of months. It's actually when I look back at that I realise how much you get to see and get to do, and it's incredible. And I want to do a big shout out personally to the amazing residents we've got in our borough for all their help with the collections for the Ukraine, and that's across all wards because people gave unconditionally, and there's a few councillors in here that saw that firsthand with me at Frimley Cricket Club alone, and we were actually one of the first lot to get aid out to the Ukraine, so I think that's a huge achievement for us. So yeah. So Moving on to item 5, leaders' announcements. I'd like to invite the leader to make his announcements, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As this is the last council meeting in the municipal year, I thought it would be appropriate to reflect on what this council has achieved over the past year and consider our priorities for the next. If we think back to April 2021, the county was just emerging from its second lockdown of the pandemic. Just over half the UK population had received their first vaccination, and as a result, the national shielding arrangements for our older, more vulnerable residents had finally lifted. For us in Surrey Heath Council, this also marked the start of an incredibly busy year, not only continuing to deliver the services our residents most rely on, but finding our way back to some tentative version of normality. A year of reopenings, re-establishing programmes and planning decisively for the future. Through the Council's determination, energy and hard work, we saw virtually all our services reopen during the spring and early summer, importantly including Camberley Theatre and Windle Valley Community Centre. We opened our brand new leisure centre, which has become a roaring success, with an unprecedented number of visitors making use of the facilities. But not only did we manage to keep, as I say, virtually all of our services running in some fashion, but we made progress on a number as well. The new youth hub opened in the town centre, focused on helping young people who've been disadvantaged by the pandemic into jobs. The Squish theatre space in the Square shopping centre has been a great hit with young families and has enjoyed sell-out performances. And in December, we saw the launch of our first Christmas panto since the start of the pandemic in early 2020. I guess it's not surprising that the opening night audience gave them a standing ovation, as much out of appreciation for what they did as the fact that they were finally allowed out of their houses. We ran a successful Theatre in the Park event in August, recognising that many people were still reluctant at that stage to go indoors. We completed 5 new or refurbished playgrounds across the Borough to ensure that young people have modern, high-quality spaces to play. Our continued investment in our parks and open spaces saw green flag status being secured for both Frimley Lodge Park and Lightwater Country Park, and a new adventure golf course opened in Lightwater just a couple of months ago. After long months of being indoors, we finally saw the return of high-profile Civic and Barra events. Key highlights for me include our joint hospital group Freedom of the Borough Parade, Celebrate Camberley Day, the Comedy Festival, and the Christmas Lights Switch-On, all of which was working with a bid. And of course, Remembrance Sunday Parade. The year before, we hadn't had one. We were also able to develop our main town. We were able to invest in the future and communicate confidence to local businesses, including through the completion of the High Street Public Realm Works and the external refurbishment of the Camberley Theatre. We successfully onshored the JPUT to enable us to exercise greater control over some of our key town centre assets. We celebrated the opening of the new Lumina development in the town centre, delivered in partnership with Barclay, providing 114 high-quality new homes, and saw the opening of a new fully affordable housing scheme at Pembroke House in partnership with Clarion Housing and again with Barclay. I believe we were there when our local businesses needed us. During the period of the pandemic, this council distributed over £48 million in grants and rate relief to local businesses. This has been a vital lifeline that has helped many of our local businesses stay afloat and our residents to remain in employment. We saw the Camberley Business Improvement District, the BID, get re-elected again for a new 5-year term with the highest vote of support in history and possibly the highest in the country. It's working with excellent partners like the BID is one of the main reasons why Camberley was shortlisted for the UK's Top Towns for Business Award. We're one of only 3 finalists, and the results should be announced shortly. We also planned decisively for the future. The Council's new 5-year strategy, which was born out of the largest and most far-reaching public engagement exercise in the borough's history, our new strategy focuses on 4 key priorities: environment, of course, health and quality of life for our residents, economy, and being an effective and responsive council. The development of the Council's new 5-year strategy took place alongside significant work to bring forward other key plans, including a new physical activity strategy, a new medium-term financial strategy, and a new draft local plan. That plan is currently out for formal public consultation as part of the Reg 18 stage of the local plan making process. To ensure we were able to deliver the Council's new ambitions, we put in place a brand new senior management structure, which I think everyone would agree was implemented at pace and is already delivering on our annual plan and budgeted savings. We've created more opportunity for collaboration with neighbouring councils with the benefit of greater resilience and efficiencies, entering into a joint agreement with Runnymede for the operation of our community service functions, which includes community transport, meals at home, telecare and the Windle Valley Day Centre. We took the lead on the establishment of joint management arrangements for the delivery of building control services, which went live at the beginning of this month. The Council successfully administered a clutch of elections, the county elections, the Borough by-election last May, a further by-election in the autumn, followed by 2 parish by-elections. And then, of course, this month by another by-election, which saw Councillor Noble being elected to this council. Councillor Noble, I believe you're out of the country, but joining us on Zoom. Okay, thank you for that. I look forward to working with you on behalf of the residents of Bisley and West End. This year, we've had an even greater focus, of course, on supporting those in the greatest need. We hosted a poverty summit at the start of the year, held virtually, and an in-person obesity summit just after the summer. We've distributed an unprecedented number of grants to community and voluntary organisations and to families in poverty, and did even more to support residents at risk of becoming homeless, ensuring that everyone had somewhere to stay during the pandemic. In January, we saw our new emergency homeless accommodation open its doors for the first time in Camberley, delivered in partnership with the Hope Hub. I think the Council can be very proud of its response to Storm Eunice in February, keeping essential services running during one of the worst storms in decades, with staff working right through the weekend to help deal with the large-scale power cuts and dangerous trees. We were one of the first councils in the country to offer support to those fleeing Afghanistan who had previously worked for our British forces, and followed through on that promise by securing accommodation and support for the 5 families who are now thriving. In support to those fleeing the brutal armed occupation of Ukraine, we're supporting over 50 local families to provide a safe haven for more than 140 Ukrainian refugees arriving in the borough over the next few weeks. We developed a new council tax support scheme that provides help for the most vulnerable in our community, which was approved by full council at the beginning of this year. There's certainly a lot to be proud of this year and many achievements in circumstances that are far from ideal. The year ahead, though, will just as likely be as challenging. To be fair, we didn't get everything right in the last year, and we need to learn from those mistakes and do better. The economy, the Ukraine war, the effects of Brexit, and the aftermath of the pandemic all mean the future is uncertain, but our residents rely on us to do what we can to help them, and to do that with integrity and transparency. So I hope we can continue to prioritise the needs of our residents, as we have done for the past year, and ensure we do everything we can to make their lives a little better, and this borough a great place to live and work. I'd like to thank my portfolio holders, the chairs of all the committees and cross-party working groups, and members from across the Chamber for the role you have played in these many successes, and of course to Surrey Heath staff, who have worked incredibly hard this year to deliver this Council's priorities. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 6, declarations of interest. Do any members have any disclosable pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests to declare in relation to the matters which are to be considered at this meeting? No? Moving on to agenda item 7, I'm advised that no questions have been received from any members of the public under Council Procedure Rule 10. Yep. Agenda item 8, no questions have been received from councillors. Correct. Moving on to item 9, Executive Committee and other bodies. Executive minutes and recommendations. Can I have a proposer for the executive minutes, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to propose the minutes for the executive the 28th of February and the 15th of March 2022.
And do you have a seconder?
I'm pleased to second those minutes, Madam Mayor.
Are you all happy to receive these minutes and to agree the recommendations? Agreed. Thank you. Planning Applications Committee. Please can I have a proposer for the Planning Application Committee minutes?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I understood the papers were going to be on the table, but I believe they're not, or I didn't get a copy.
It did say to be late.
Yeah, this can be deferred to the next meeting. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on to Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee. Can I have a proposer for the committee minutes, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to propose the minutes of Performance of Finance Scrutiny Committee dated 17th of February and 9th of March.
And do you have a seconder?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm happy to second those minutes.
Thank you. Members, are you happy to receive these minutes? Thank you. External Partnerships Select Committee. Can I have a proposer for these committee minutes, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Before I propose the minutes, I'd like to explain why I'm still masked up. My husband is still government shielded, so I have to be really, really careful. I'd like to propose the minutes of the external partnerships on the 1st of March 2022. Thank you.
And do we have a seconder?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to second those minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Rise. Members, are you happy to receive these minutes? Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. We're moving on to Joint Staff Consultative Group. Can I have a proposer for the notes of the Joint Staff Consultative Group, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to propose the minutes of the 3rd of March and the 29th of March 2022 of the Joint Staff Consultative Group. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tapper. And do you have a seconder?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm happy to second the notes of the Joint Staff Consultative Group, 3rd of March and the 29th of March. Thank you.
Thank you. If people were wondering about the Employment Committee, that will come to the next meeting. I saw people looking through there, so apologies. That will come to the next meeting. Okay. Members, are you happy to receive those notes? Sorry, from the joint. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Moving on to item 10. I would like to ask Councillor Rodney Bates to move his motion and indicate if he wishes to reserve his right to speak.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to formally move motion which is outlined in item number 10, and assuming I have a seconder, I propose to speak straight away.
Thank you, Councillor Bates. And do you have a seconder?
Madam Mayor, I'm more than happy to second this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Gallagher, did you want...
and I do reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Do we have any speakers? Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Bates.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. My role is to introduce this motion, and I'm delighted to do that. And thank you also for those members who contacted me privately before the meeting in respect of this. So firstly, what I'm going to do is explain a bit about what is fair trade for those who may be watching or anybody in the room who's not aware. I'll briefly touch on what items can be fair trade, what is a fair trade community, what is the goals, and then I'll cover the remaining elements which are in the motion. So firstly, what is fair trade? Well, it's pretty simple, really. It's about a principle in which we say that trade should be based on fairness so that producers can earn security and sustainability. And fair trade sets social, economic and environmental standards for those involved in the supply chain, such as companies and farmers. And they do that by ensuring there's a protection of rights for workers, concern for the environment, and a minimum price safety net. And there is a fair trade mark, which I'm sure many of you will have seen. You've probably got products at home, and I'll leave Councillor Galliford to talk about that in a few moments' time. Some of the items that can be fair trade, again, I'm sure many of you have got these at home, but as well as tea and coffee, which many of you will know, there are many other products. In fact, there's over 4,000 that are registered as of 2019. So, for example, we have a third of bananas in the UK are fair trade, chocolate, wine, clothes, soft drinks, sweets and nuts, beauty products, herbs and spices, and many others. And it's important to say, as we put in the motion, that there are many communities across the UK that are already fair trade communities or have been fair trade communities. And there have been over 600 that have been through this, and so we are certainly not amongst the first in regard to that. What is a fair trade community? Well, it basically, a fair trade community is about sending a powerful message to those that in our community that we are concerned about trade, and we're concerned about the ethics of trade, and there are 5 specific goals which I'm going to cover and which are already in the motion. The first is that we, as a local council, pass a resolution, which hopefully we'll do in a few moments' time, supporting fair trade and agreeing to serve fair trade products where we're able to do so. Secondly, that a range of fair trade products are readily available in our area's retail outlets, our supermarket shops, petrol stations, and also our catering outlets, such as cafes, pubs and restaurants. And many of you know from your own communities that, in fact, this is already taking place and that they are already serving such products. The third area is regarding local workplaces and community organisations, such as places of worship, schools and community groups, so that they are also supporting fair trade and are using products wherever possible. And again, within our community, we already have this, many places of worship already have this as a policy, and there are many employers who I believe actually do this as well. It's just about recognising that and supporting these values. The fourth is to have media coverage and events to raise awareness and understanding across the community. And finally, to set up a local fair trade group, which is concerned to ensure that the Fair Trade Town campaign continues to develop support. And it's important to note that the steering group is not a council steering group. It's not a working group of the council. It's actually a community steering group made up of partners, the council being one of those partners, but including some of the people that I've put in this motion, such as schools and businesses. So if I just quickly take you through the remaining elements of this motion, we do believe, hopefully we will believe that we say that fair trade is an important value within our community. Many people personally practice that, and I think it's now time that we join the hundreds of other places across the country that do the same. That as a council, that we would serve fair trade products wherever possible and practical at council events. And I just want to clarify that. That's not about us going and suddenly doing a tour of our staff rooms here and removing all of the items which are not fair trade. It's about promoting those fair trade products and to ensure, for example, at our council events, where it is possible and where it is practicable, that we actually do serve fair trade tea and coffee or other fair trade products. And if it's not possible and if it's not practical, we don't do it. And that's in the wording and the support of the motion, just to clarify that for you. That we do promote awareness and understanding of fair trade through our communication channels, and that is pretty easy to do, I would imagine. We do that already through a number of different methods. The Fair Trade Steering Group, as I've mentioned, is established, and that is an independent steering group with a council representative or an officer and a member would be my suggestion. And then finally, to support the application for formal fair trade status for the Borough of Surrey Heath by no later than the 31st of March 2023, because it's important to understand that this is only the first step tonight if we pass this. It is not, this is it, and then suddenly we submit. There is a need for that steering group to make contact with shops and churches and other groups to establish who is selling fair trade products around our area. And so that's why generally it takes about 12 months. Obviously 12 months runs into Purda, and this is something I think this council has the commitment to do now. I hope it is. We'll find out in a few minutes if that is true or not. But that's the reason for the date. This is a cross-party, hopefully, initiative. This is done in councils across the country of all political persuasions, and hopefully it's now time for Surrey Heath to be added to that list. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Bates. Councillor Galliford.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to thank Councillor Bates for putting this motion forward this evening. So the fair trade mark is well known and respected across the world, and whilst other organisations have jumped at gaining a foothold in moral marketing, none actually do as much for so many as fair trade. Supporting over 1.8 million farmers and workers worldwide, the foundation is 50% owned by those farmers and workers, the only such organisation to have this written into their constitution. Local fair trade groups and businesses receive a social premium on top of a good price for their product, and it is their workers who freely decide how to spend this extra money within their own communities. Again, the only organisation to allow this. This has given rise to initiatives such as educational bursaries for children, provision of schools, healthcare needs such as clinics, transportation and clean water projects, to name but a few. Fair trade also works closely with the Rainforest Alliance in not just promoting but enacting regenerative policies and practices such as preventing deforestation, engaging directly in protecting biodiversity and building net positive businesses in line with the United Nations 17 Sustainable Developmental Goals. Combating global warming and embedding climate resilience into food production is essential to the survival, not just of those local environments, of food production and people's welfare, but for all of us worldwide. And remember, we aren't talking about charity handouts here, but the provision of a good, honest wage and a realistic price for produce that local people are already experts in providing to markets across the world. As this motion points out, as a council, we are lagging behind our neighbouring boroughs and county council in adopting fair trade status. Simply by using the power of purchasing fair trade products, we can collectively promote stability in the world by enabling sustainable communities to produce sustainable food supplies for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Galliford. Any other members wish to speak? Councillor Malvagnam.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I welcome this entire motion. It's a good, excellent motion by Councillor Bates and Councillor Galliford together. I think we should support it. That's my opinion. But having said that, we also have to be careful. As a council, I'm talking about the council, I fully understand the fair trade concept. As most of you know, I come from that part of the world, a long time ago, mind you, where fair trade actually is helping people. As a council, as we know, we are going through a very tough time. We had made a loss over the last year, and we are projecting to lose another 7+ million. That's a lot of money for this small council. If we set this particular project, that's what I would call it, there are cost implications. And the cost implications are, unfortunately, has not been set out in this motion. That needs to be addressed. If we can address it clearly, and with the help of the officers, because there would be officer time involved, that would be extremely useful to get this passed without much ado. So I've got some amendments which I would like to propose at this stage, but Having said that, I've also laid in front of you a page of amendments, well, highlighted in red and yellow, and we could discuss this now or at a later stage, but that is where I'm coming from. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Malvagnam. Do you have a seconder?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to second the amendment to this motion, and I would like to reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other speakers?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm actually quite surprised at this amendment, if I'm honest. I was one of the councillors that rang Councillor Bates to seek clarity on just a couple of points with his motion. And I think that there's one particular bit that I'd like to draw members' attention to, which is the bit that actually says, bear with me, wherever possible and practical. Okay, I understand I suppose the reasoning behind Councillor Malvagnam's amendment in terms of cost implications. But actually, this amendment itself has cost implications in terms of officer time and all the rest of it. And I actually find it quite oxymoronic, to be honest with you, this amendment. So there's no way I'll be supporting it. I think the motion as it is spot on, and there's absolutely no need to change it. So just thought I would add that to the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Deach. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Many, many years ago, I was involved in this council and Churches Together in Camberley that set up, many years ago, fair trading. And this council at that point did adopt it, along with shops in the borough, I don't know why it was stopped or anything, but I was involved in that. And the churches every Sunday would have stalls selling the sort of things that Councillor Bates has mentioned. So I fully support this, and I think the sooner we can get on with this, Madam Mayor, councillors, the better.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Any other speakers? Councillor Tapper, would you like to speak on this?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I would. I think we're all agreed that this is an admirable motion, and that for this council to support a fair trade initiative within its workings is entirely the right thing to do. However, the part of the motion to which Councillor Deach has drawn our attention only covers part of the situation with regard to the potential cost to this council of adopting this particular initiative as it stands. The cost issue itself is nowhere mentioned, and to ask for this council to write a blank cheque is really not advisable in the current financial situation that we find ourselves in. And I don't think that it is unfair that that financial situation be investigated before we move further. And that's simply all we're doing, and there is no other initiative that I'm aware of within this council where we decide to go ahead with that initiative without knowing anything about the costs involved. So I would submit that this amendment is required. I'm confident that the outcome that will come from this will be one that can at least be discussed, first of all, by the Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee, as is right and proper, and that it is their purpose in discussing that and making recommendations to this full council as to how we should proceed on this. So I fail to see why there is any real objection required to the amendment that is proposed, and I would encourage everybody to vote in favour of it. It does not negate in any way, shape or form the substantive motion. It only encourages it to follow proper process. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Tapper. Councillor Garrett?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm taking one of Councillor Bates's comments. I wasn't planning to speak on this, but but I'm going to. Firstly, thank you for bringing this motion. I think it's certainly something we need to do. I've sat in this chamber a few times recently and we've discussed a lot of motions, and I think we brought up the fact that cost implications of all of those motions, and we were told that we don't need to worry about that. And on this occasion, I think this is something that if we go with the amendment, we're actually going to end up spending more officer time on it, bringing it to the P&F committee, which has already got a very laden agenda, which means it might end up being put a long way down the agenda. And I think this is something that needs to be done sooner rather than later. So I can't support the amendment, and I would like to thank you for bringing the motion forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garrett. Councillor Wheeler?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Exactly what he said, I wasn't going to speak on it either. And as my very knowledgeable friend on the right-hand side often says, essentially, one of the things that perpetually irritates me is when we try and kick something into the long grass, and I think this is just a question of delaying something which is a complete no-brainer not to introduce. In terms of having clear cost implication understandings, we're not going to get that by taking it to performance and finance, because actually the cost implication and the benefit of this is going to have to be weighed up on almost each individual case on an individual basis, in the same way that we approach any other purchasing. But what we're saying is that as a general intent, our first preference would always be to a fair trade supplier. And from that point of view, I fully support the original motion and cannot support the amendment, which I think is just delaying. It just delays it, and I can't actually see anything that we're going to get back from it at all. I think it's important that we do note that practically all of our residents in the borough are under a huge financial pressure, and as a council, we are under a huge financial pressure. But the wording of the amendment already copes for that. So I just unfortunately cannot support any amendment to the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler.
Councillor Brooks.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Brooks.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I think it's a very considered motion by Councillor Bates. Well done. And yeah, I mean, it allows for everybody. There's a steering group, for goodness sake. There's all these things to actually make sure it's going to be following process and bring up any concerns and everything else across not just the council, but businesses, churches, all sorts. So I think it covers it all off. The actual detail of the motion is very good, so I'll be supporting the motion as it stands. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. Councillor Galliford?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to remind Council that, as a council, we've recently opened our hearts and homes to refugees, and our residents have shown willingness to care and share with no regard to cost to self or the council. This motion assists people to stay in their homes, to earn a decent living wage, and to provide for their children, their future generations, a happy or relatively happy and healthy lifestyle. The cost benefit has been mentioned, but when can anyone tell me that cost benefit for people and climate has ever been included in any economic formulas, etc.? Usually it's ignored. This motion is about cost benefit for those people and also the climate. And the repercussions that that has, as I've said previously, ripples out worldwide. This enables people to stay on their land rather than having to be economic refugees. And I think we need to hold that in mind when we vote on this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Galliford. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to join the I wasn't going to speak but brigade. I'm going to support the motion as it stands. But at some stage, it would be helpful, I think, I personally would like to find out, or Councillor Bates at another stage, and let us know how we can measure that the money gets down to the producers. And this is always an area that one, you give money, you support causes, but you never quite know that it's getting to the people that are in the fields, that are growing, that are doing the picking, and and not to get diverted to other sources, should I say. So at some stage it would be helpful, I think, to hear that, and I'm sure others would agree with me, but yeah, I'm going to support the motion. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. I believe Councillor Galliford has a leaflet that anybody may want to pick up on the way out about fair trade and that. She was kindly waving it about.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I mean, I did point out earlier that the foundation is 50% owned by those farmers and workers, and it's the only organisation where the actual people decide how that money is spent.
Councillor Galliford, sorry, you've already spoken, so you can't, sorry. Okay. Councillor Bates, would you like your right to reply?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I will exercise my right to reply. So, firstly, I have listened very carefully to the discussion and also the text of the amendment, and I won't be accepting it into the motion. But I would like to thank the Liberal Democrats for the wider support that they are giving to it, and also other members who've spoken on this, because it does sound to me as if there is a lot of unanimity in the Council, which is always a good thing to do. The concern, I suppose, that the Liberal Democrat group have put forward here is regarding the alleged financial aspects of this. And I did cover it to some degree in my original motion, but just to be clear about this, because I think it's important to be clear, and hopefully this is then a misunderstanding rather than anything else. There would be a small amount of officer time in terms of attending a steering group. That would be, which I would suggest be one officer and one member. Apart from the initial meeting, which I would suggest may be held in the council, but doesn't have to be, that would be the limit of the amount of resource. So attendance at a steering group and setting up the initial one. The steering group then does the rest, not the council. So a councillor and officers, that would be the limit of that. A press release or media, similar things, again, that just covers in terms of officer time in regard to that. I think where there may have been some confusion is regarding this issue of purchasing, because purchasing is not covered within this, and that's quite specifically about that. So we're not saying that as a whole, as a council, with the exception of products, which is covered under IV, it doesn't mean that suddenly we have to kind of cancel our contracts and suddenly go to a whole bunch of fair trade contracts. So I'm hoping that may have been a misunderstanding, perhaps on the amendment, but that isn't what was being proposed. And so hopefully that will clarify that. I entirely agree with the comments made by a number of colleagues regarding the fact that what's being proposed in the amendment would actually take up far more resource than actually is being outlined in this. So without commenting in detail about the Chief Executive's arrangements and things like that, clearly if he was to write a report using his hourly rate, and then that goes to a meeting, and then that goes to another meeting, and there's the committee reports and stuff like that, that's going to be substantially more than is actually being proposed. So I'm afraid for that reason, whilst I'm sympathetic with the Liberal Democrats, and of course finances are important, I'm hoping that they may have just misunderstood what is being proposed here, and actually the amount of officer and council resource here is negligible. For that reason, I won't be supporting the amendment, and I encourage you to vote against it.
Thank you, Councillor Bates. So we need to vote on the amendment. So are we just doing a show of hands? I think should be fine. Are we all agreed with that? So all those in favour, please raise your hands. And all those against?
So the
So the amendment
has
has
fallen.
Okay, so the amendment has fallen. So now we need to go back to the original motion and vote on that. Are we all happy with a show of hands?
Unless there are any other
sorry.
speakers.
Any other speakers before we move to that? No? Okay, so we'll go with a show of hands. All those in favour for the motion, please raise your hands. I think that's unanimous and the motion is carried. Thank you all. Okay. We're now moving on to, thank you, item 11. I'd like to invite the leader to introduce the report on the governance working group and to move the recommendation therein.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Members, as I've said on a number of the past few council meetings, this paper states the recommendations from the governance working group following our decision to task the monitoring officer with a complete review of our constitution. On this occasion, the recommendations are in respect of the council's executive committees and other bodies' procedural rules. As usual, many of the changes are what I would term process changes, simply bringing the Constitution into line with the new corporate management structure, latest legislation, guidelines and current practice. There was a lot of discussion at the working group on how far the Chief Executive's powers to limit or prevent a meeting or motion should go. Universally, it was agreed the power should remain in the hands of the members, and the CEO's role was to advise and assist those members, particularly where he feels a motion may be unlawful or improper or has significant budgetary implications. I would draw your attention to particularly 2.3. The proposal is to do away with the rather antiquated rule of only one agenda item for an extraordinary council meeting. This has led us on a number of occasions to be in the rather silly position of having two back-to-back one-item agenda council meetings. And so that is proposed to do away with that and allow multiple, although it will still be an extraordinary council meeting rules. 2.9, upon receipt of two or more similar motions, the latters would be rejected and the officers would work with the proposers to merge them if possible. And because they're similar, they could be amended in council. 210 to 215 recommends changes that allow the mayor to facilitate better debating management within the chamber, including increasing or changing time limits and adding broader scope for personal explanations where appropriate. 218 introduces the possibility of using electronic voting, which is now available within our new video system, as and when we choose to use it. Sections 3 and 4 relate in similar ways to the executive committees and working groups. Madam Mayor, I move the recommendations in this report because I believe they will improve our ability to debate and subsequently vote on the many important issues we will have before us going forward, and I hope members will support them. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Do you have a seconder?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm happy to second that.
Thank you, Councillor Bates. Do we have any comments, members? That was hands straight up. Yeah, I was just going to say who was first, because you both went like that. Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to first start off by accepting what the Leader of the Council has said regarding the procedural changes. However, this amendment to the Constitution does go far beyond just procedural changes. I think at points there is significant changes to the Constitution. So I think it's really important that we all actually consider the actual changes that are being proposed. So, for example, the additional impact on the length of motions. For example, the new edition of a motion shall contain no more than 350 words. So I think Councillor Bates's motion would have been out today on that. For example, the additional amendments into 12.4, which is improper, out of order, or not relevant motions. I don't really understand the need for a specific additional language for the Chief Executive to be able to reject a motion that is deemed to be unlawful. If something is deemed to be unlawful, it is unlawful. So why does that need to be spelled out in the Constitution? I wouldn't expect any motion to come before this council that's unlawful. I also think that the addition of action which has financial implications that are outside of the approved budget, again, I imagine Councillor Bates's motion tonight would have been foul of that because, again, the budget approved did not include any additional budget for secure and fair trade status. So I think it's additional aspects of the Constitution which is just making it a little bit more convoluted. The biggest issue that I have, and it's an issue that the Leader of the Council did not mention in his opening remarks, is the removal of the state of the borough debate. Now, I actually want to thank the Leader of the Council and the Governance Working Group for bringing this up, because before then I didn't actually know that this was even a thing. And I agree with the actual comments of the report that it hasn't been used, and maybe it should be used more often. But just because something hasn't been used, or the current Leader of the Council does not wish to use it, that doesn't mean it should be removed from the Constitution and removed from being used at all. And I was doing a bit of research today, and it's not something that is fallen out of practice. There are quite a number of boroughs, Kingston, Waltham Forest, Brighton City and Hove, all have regular status of the borough debates. And I think instead of just removing it, maybe it would actually be a better exercise to review the actual use of it and how we can use that in Surrey Heath to actually improve engagement with residents, which I think the whole point of the state of the borough debate should be for. And again, one of the most interesting aspects of this amendment is the seemingly pointless move of the point of order and right to personal explanation from 14.13 to 14.11. I don't really understand why we're just moving bits around in the Constitution. It seems like at points it's just to fill a gap. Yes, I know parts have been removed, but there's no need to do such minutiae. I also want to highlight the point, and on page 22, when it refers to the change from the executive head of corporate to head of legal and democratic services regarding notice of reference of motion, surely that should be reference to the monitoring officer, which I think would actually future-proof the Constitution for any further senior leadership changes, because obviously the monitoring officer is responsible for that, whereas the position of head of legal and democratic services may not be here forever. So I think on the round, I'm not going to be supporting the amendment tonight, mainly because I think there are changes in there that I think need to be reviewed, and I would ask that the Governance Working Group actually review this again, and we actually have a further discussion on the aspects that I've raised regarding the state of the borough debate. And I do not believe that by not making the procedural changes, such as the changing of the job titles, will affect anything too much, because we've been existing perfectly fine up until this point. And as my understanding on it, of any legal agreement, that it's a level of interpretation when it comes to a legal document. So a constitution, if it's referring to the executive head of corporate, and that person is the head of legal and democratic services, surely we can actually make that assumption, and that should then come back at a later date. But as I said, based on what I deem to be significant changes to the Constitution, which I do not believe are warranted, I cannot support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Malvagnam.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Most of you know I'm also in the working group for changes to the Constitution, which I welcome. And I have the opportunity as well to make a small input into these amendments. But having said that, I did make a point during this particular section to the leader about State of the Borough of Surrey Heath debate. I was quite surprised, actually, that it was being removed, even at that stage, because I think it's paramount, absolutely paramount. The leader of the council should actually speak and explain. I mean, what he did today was excellent. We have done all the positive things, but we don't hear the other side of it. We got to hear both sides of a balance sheet. You can't have only positives. You must also have the negatives. We know we have gone through a tremendous, difficult time over the last years, I would say, and we are going to see the same going forward. We'd like to hear that, not we, the residents would like to hear that, and residents should be hearing that from the leader. Although we, the councillors, can explain to them door to door, but the leader should be putting his hand up and said, we got it wrong, these are the reasons. We got it right, these are the reasons. And the debate has to take place in this chamber. So the residents do have a chance to participate. And also the wording in there, it says, the leader may call. I mean, like Councillor Rice said, in fact, I also did not know it until this existed, until I attended the meeting for governance meeting. Leaders should not have an option here. It's a must. It's almost a must. A leader should come to the council and explain what he and his executive have done during the year. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Malvagnan. Sorry, Councillor Betton, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If we were a business, we would have an annual general meeting. At the annual general meeting, the chairman would make a statement, a speech to the shareholders and everything else about what has gone on in the past year, how the business is moving forward. The fact that it's possible the leader may call a State of the Borough debate should be, I think, will call. I think it's a great idea. I didn't know it existed. And the fact that it's being taken out, I think, is a mistake. One of the things that happened in the past few weeks in West End and Bisley is that people were feeling dissociated from the council. If the leader makes an annual statement of progress, that will increase the amount of connectivity between the councillors and the residents. I think that should be left in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Betton. Councillor Bates.
Thank you. I'll take the opportunity now to second the original motion, I think, and speak to it. So in terms of as I've understood the objections that have been raised, I think are on three areas. So I'll cover them in turn. First was a concern regarding the wording of motions and whether there should be a word limit on motions. The second was in regard to whether the financial aspects of motions should be considered. And the third area was the State of the Borough debate. I think those were the three areas that have been predominantly raised. So if I've got that wrong, then I've no doubt colleagues behind will shout. In terms of the wording of the motion, the motion tonight is nowhere near 350 words. In fact, it's about 210. So tonight's motion would certainly not have been ruled out on grounds of word length. The purpose of having a word length within a motion is to try and be specific regarding what the request is. 350 words is actually quite a lot. I appreciate for politicians it may not be so much, but in reality, whatever motion it is, from wherever it's in the chamber, we do need to try and be as specific as we can regarding the length of motions. I think there's probably only been a couple that have probably been over this, to be honest, but nonetheless, we're not the only council that would have a word limit, and that's the thinking of that, and certainly I have no objection with that. And it does actually mean, for those of us who may be tempted to put in motions, we have to think wisely about what words we use. And so I think that's a good thing. In terms of the financial aspect, I'm not going to rehash the discussion we've just had, but I don't believe it would have been ruled out on finance grounds either. And I do actually think there is an important point here, which is fair enough, that the financial aspects in principle should be covered, or if there isn't any, then that's clear. So this obviously, my motion was submitted a number of weeks ago. Usually I submit it on the day before the motion deadline, but this was actually submitted a number of weeks ago before the debate that we are having on this, before the governance working group. But on hindsight, I'm happy to have made that clearer. But I think I don't have, again, a problem with that. And I'm quite happy with making sure that any motions are in a similar vein. The third area on the State of the Borough debate, I've been here a long time, and I can remember when this was first initiated, and Councillor Brooks might well remember this, because I'm pretty sure it was initiated by former leader Councillor Gibson, and she never actually held one. So as far as I can remember, and maybe Miss Willis remember, but I do not ever remember there having been a State of the Borough debate in all of my time. It was something that was put together as an idea by her, maybe Councillor Chapman may remember as well, but I don't think it was ever done. Now, should it be done, should it not be done? I think, I would be personally happy to relook at this. I think there may be alternative ways of doing what is being outlined, because it's quite reasonable the leader should, whoever the leader is, should be kind of scrutinised. And to some degree, what we heard tonight was probably getting quite close to a State of the Borough address, if I'm honest with you. So I think there is an element that could be looked at on that. It's not something I feel that strongly about, because I think there are other ways of holding the leader to account. But I wouldn't have a problem if we send that bit back, if that is the view of members generally. But the other two I'm quite happy with, and I can't recommend any changes to those.
Thank you, Councillor Bates. Any other members? Leader, would you like to come back on that?
Thank you. There is no. Is there an amendment before us at this point? We're still debating the original motion. Okay. So thank you. Not least of all for wanting to hear more from the leader. All right. I'm very conscious of trying to be brief up here. The reason I was happy to support the culling of the State of the Borough debate was that I actually believe that it's not a very good way, if we were to use it, it's not a very good way for a leader to report to the council and have the debate. I think there are more effective ways. We had a very long and constructive debate on the local plan. We have a very long and constructive debate on the 5-year plan. And those are much, much more effective ways of looking at the future of this borough. The 5-year plan literally is 5 years. Okay, we report on the annual plan, and the local plan is, if I'm not mistaken, it's 25 or 30 years? At least 15. Okay, so I think there are ways of doing that. It was mentioned about holding the executive to account. When I was chair of PNF, long time ago, when it had a much lighter agenda, I brought in that the members of the executive would, for the first time, actually be in front of PNF and would be questioned by them. And I think that holds the executive to account. I think Councillor Bates has mentioned about the 350 words. It is surprisingly long, 350 words, as is surprisingly 8 minutes that we're allowed to talk if you're proposing something. And I think the things about unlawful, if I'm Councillor Rice, I think if I've just understood you correctly, I think the point that you alluded to, the wording of the paper is that we debated that and then agreed with you and we didn't put it forward. Okay, so it's not actually part of the paper that we're putting forward. So I think I can understand the points that are being made, but I think the working group had a long discussion. The monitoring officer lays everything out. Mrs. Willis lays everything out. We debate it. We by far, I think Councillor Mavaganam, you may agree, We don't just sit there and accept everything that's said. These papers, if you go through them with a fine tooth, you realise how much stuff we actually throw back. And this is what we believe, the governance working group believe, will make us more effective as debaters and therefore more effective for our residents. It is not in any way trying to cut down. The vast majority of the changes we're proposing is about actually opening up and making us better. So I would urge you to support the recommendations from the working group as they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. So, members, are we happy to agree the report and the proposals? A show of hands. And those against? So the proposals are carried. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to item 12, committee memberships. Can I ask a member to move the recommendations set out in the agenda paper? Who do I need to? Leader, sorry. That's not.
Madam Mayor, I'm happy to propose that.
Thank you, kind sir. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Malvaginam, thank you.
Madam Mayor, I'm happy to second it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Do we have any comments, members? No? Okay, all, is that agreed, members? Agreed. Thank you. Item 13, leaders' question time. I'd now like to invite members to ask questions of the leader, Councillor Alan McClafferty, on issues relating to the executive functions. Please be aware that the 20 minutes is allocated to the leader's question time. In order to give everyone a chance, I will try to ensure all members have had an opportunity to ask a first question before I invite you to ask a second question. So if you have more than one question, please can I ask that you prioritise your first question. Can I now have first question? Thank you, Councillor Rise.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just asking now, as I believe the leader has taken on the environment and health portfolio, maybe albeit temporarily, if he will meet with me and Mitch and Deepcote Ward councillors regarding the increased problem of fly tipping down Bellow Road, if he'll meet with me and Ward councillors to discuss that issue.
Okay, happy to.
Councillor Brooks.
Could the leader tell us about the state of the borough, please?
I'm so glad you asked me that.
Councillor Gordon.
I was very pleased to see the Green Waste Service open again next month. Can you please let me know when we're going to start taking on new clients, please, for it?
Thank you. Yes, the announcement went out recently saying that we managed to get the garden waste service back up and running. It's fortnightly, and they're going to do 2 what they call cycles in May. I think early May is when they go through. And I had a meeting with Joint Waste today, and they confirmed that they want to get 2 cycles in, so a month's worth, just to make sure that they've got everyone back up and running and they've collected everything. They pointed out that there will be a much higher tonnage to be collected because it's been longer, obviously. But at the end of May, they will start to open up their lists again. And I believe there are something like 300 residents in Surrey Heath who are on the waiting list. And they will start to put them onto the cycles Now, it won't just be, to be clear, it won't just be 300 people join, because they've got to be added per cycle and depends on roads, and then they've got to balance drivers and capacity, etc. But I'm pleased to say at the beginning of May, we'll be opening up to new clients.
Thank you.
End of May, we'll be opening up to new clients.
Councillor Malvagnam.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've been waiting for this opportunity to ask the leader a question. I believe it was at the last exec when I brought up the subject of half year and the third 9 months results being presented, and it was not being compared to the budget because the budget figures were not in line, or should have been, but it wasn't. There was a valid reason. At the same time, the leader took the chance to take slight at me by saying, every time I've asked a question, I've got it wrong. I want to now start from this council up until 2023 council, everything I have asked to and which has come right. Question number one, do you agree that the first episode of the CEO salary of 37.5% increase was discovered and that was correct? Would you agree? And if so, would you like to go through this agony every council? And like I said at the last meeting, would you like to reconsider what you told of me at that meeting? Thank you, Leader.
You may respond.
Thank you, Councillor Malvagnam. I remember my comment vividly. I think it was just after you had said, you probably don't know the answer to this, but I'll ask anyway. I'm not entirely sure about the Chief Exec's 37.5, but you're going back to 3 years ago? 3 years ago? Okay. You know, every day is a school day in this council, so we go back in history to 3 years ago. I think your question was, do I agree that it was discovered? Yes, I absolutely do agree it was discovered. Right. I think what you're really getting at is, would you like me to be more collegiate rather than what you felt was insulting? And I would apologize if you felt insulted. It was not meant to be. But I think the question I was actually referring to was you had pointed out on a couple of occasions, because even you would agree you're not perfect, wouldn't you?
Probably not.
Yeah. All right, okay. But there have been times when I felt that you haven't given all of the facts that were pertinent to the question you were asking.
Any other questions, members? Councillor Bates.
Thank you. I'll hopefully ask something which perhaps is something which I know a number of people have raised concern about, which is about our refugee situation. So can I ask for an update, please, in terms of how many Ukrainian refugees may have now entered into Surrey Heath? Are those people being welcomed into the community as they should be welcomed? Can we just be reassured that none of them are going to be shipped off to Rwanda under what is, by all accounts, a pretty disgraceful policy? And can the leader please take up with Mr Gove that the way to deal with refugees that are struggling and fleeing war-torn countries is not to send them off to Africa?
Okay. I'm going to answer this in two parts, Councillor Bates. I'm going to answer let's say, the more politically charged element, and then my colleague, Councillor Garrett, is better placed to tell you because he's got kind of hands-on with the support for the residents, etc. And I think you'll get a fuller, better answer from him. My understanding of the government's scheme about shipping people off to Rwanda is that they are specifically talking about asylum seekers. And of course, these are refugees, and those are two very different things. So I don't think for a second anyone would be shipped off to Rwanda. As leader of this council, I'm more than happy to have that discussion with Mr. Gove, our MP, and to get him to clarify exactly what the scheme is when it's finally been clarified, because I don't believe it is clear at this point, and to make sure that any refugees are excluded from whatever the scheme is about shipping people to Rwanda. Okay? So I'm more than happy to talk to Mr. Gove about that. In terms of them being welcomed into Surrey Heath and the numbers, I could answer that, but as I say, I think Councillor Garrett would give you a better answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Leader. Yes, so the figures change daily. The number of sponsors currently is 51 in Surrey Heath. Now, this is the Homes for Ukraine, not the Ukrainian families one, because the figures for those we haven't got are not as forthcoming. Numbers of guests waiting on visa application decisions is 143. There are currently, as of this morning, 13 individuals in Surrey Heath, either arrived or arriving very, very soon, and that's to 8 households. When they arrive, they get, before they arrive, there's the full DBS check and household checks to make sure that they're obviously meeting all the criteria they need to meet. The family support team have been working very hard on that and making sure they go around all the houses of the sponsors that are lined up. One of the biggest delays is visas. The system, it's like a bottleneck. There's lots of them going in and then not as many coming out, unfortunately. So it is trickles and fits and starts. But at the moment, those are the figures. And obviously, I will try and update you as and when they update. Thank you.
Yeah. Can we go to Councillor Noble, please, on Zoom, and welcome.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Could I ask the leader, please, what steps are to be taken next year to ensure that changes in the classification of costs, such as the Chief Executive's Department, are better communicated to residents?
I think our most recent communication to residents about that was in the leaflet that we put in with the council tax, which was read by a surprising number of people. I think it's fair to say that that communication was pretty poor. I think that it didn't go through the kind of checks that you would expect it to. And I don't think there was enough effort put into making sure that it told the more accurate picture. And by that, and I think, Councillor Noble, you're alluding to this, that the fact that we changed the way that the overheads were allocated to one department, in this case the Chief Exec, was nowhere to be seen in the leaflet, and therefore people were left to draw their own conclusions, which were, of course, negative, particularly given the history of this council with previous Chief Exec. So that litany of things that are wrong are the list of things that Mr. Roberts and I have discussed in some detail to make sure that they are not repeated moving forward.
Councillor Malvagnan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. May I thank Councillor Garrett and the leader regarding the refugees, welcoming the refugees to our borough, which I think is one of the great things we have done. One other thing which I did speak to the appropriate officer is, whilst communicating the part with regarding to the refugees being settled, not settled, temporarily settled in a hotel, that I believe should be done, because what's happening is the rumour mill has started. And I think we should make it very clear to the residents that it's all temporary, they're moving on kind of thing. I don't know whether it's temporary or not, but I think we should communicate it a little bit more clearer. Thank you, Leader.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Malvagnan. Again, just to be clear, I don't believe there are any refugees in any local hotels in Surrey Heath. Okay, you may well be referring to the asylum seekers, which are in a local hotel. Okay, and again, going back to Councillor Bates' point, you know, the government is very clearly differentiating between refugees in one system and asylum seekers in another. The Home Office, the strong advice from the Home Office is that these are extremely vulnerable people, extremely vulnerable. And there are people in our society who we would rather not were in our society. And I'm not talking about the asylum seekers, I'm talking about some residents who feel that those people don't belong or they shouldn't be looked after. And in fact, they're prepared to actually exercise violence against them. And so the strong advice of the Home Office is don't indicate where they are, don't indicate how many they are, and leave them to it. And in fact, more or less, the councillors, local councillors, should take it on the chin that they are not putting this out into the ether that these exist. Now, there's some pretty easy flaws in that the residents are going to know anyway, and social media exists, and they're really asking us not to fan the flames of any problem. That said, I think that it's only recently that the Home Office started to inform local councils that they'd done it. So this is an agreement between the Home Office and the person or company that owns the hotel, and they've only just started to inform local councils that they're there. My understanding is that it is temporary. They are processing them, probably not as quickly as everybody would like, including the asylum seekers, but we can assure the residents only of the fact that they are there and they're part of the government scheme. But they are not our responsibility. We have no control over what happens to them. I do know that we've actually gone out, particularly some councillors in this chamber, have gone out and made them feel welcome and have helped them with cooking and barbecuing and shopping in the right places, etc. Right? But I don't believe this council can assure the residents of what the government scheme for them is.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Following on from the Leader's announcements, such good news. I'm getting a lot from residents and across Facebook groups across this borough. There's lots of good news stories. Places Leisure, there's waiting lists at Places Leisure. During these school holidays, Pitch and Patch at Lightwater, they're queuing to get onto there. The High Street is really, really successful. New restaurants. So much really good news. And I'm wondering if the Leader might think of getting some of these items into the next Heath scene. Because I think, again, it's getting the message over to our residents. The atrium, the cinema, all these things they've got there, bowling, the Laser Quest, they're hugely used and welcomed to the residents of this borough. So it's a lot of good news. Let's get it out there, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. In fact, I've just been told that they're just about to start the process again for the next summer Heath scene, where they're collecting articles and news items, etc. And you're right. You know, I know from the administration's point of view, of course, it reflects, well, let's get good news out here. But the truth is that the money is, you know, the council's money, it's the residents' money. And this council, just look at the way the numbers are made up, right? This council has to act as a whole for it to be successful for the residents, and I don't see why we shouldn't be putting as much good news as possible out into the Heath scene. So thank you.
Thank you, Leader. That concludes the questions for the Leader. We are now going to move on to item 14, which is exclusion of press and public. I move that under section 100A 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the consideration of the business set out in items 15 and 16 on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 3 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act. Do I have a seconder?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm happy to second that motion.
Thank you. Is that agreed, members?